At the moment, the human race seems to once again be obsessed with space exploration, with more and more private companies entering the space race, and with those companies putting forward increasingly ambitious plans, it seems likely that it won't be too much longer, relatively speaking, before the human race begins its own special brand of destructive colonialism on another planet. But why are we, as a species, so dead set on leaving Earth? After all, there are plenty of places here on Earth where, due to logistical impossibilities or arbitrary rules set down by various governing bodies, that we're unable to go. Why are we not going to those places? Whilst we don't have a good answer for this question, we do have a list of some of them. So here we go. Although Ilha de Queimada Grande, more commonly referred to as Snake Island, might be a herpetologist's dream holiday destination, for most normal people it's the stuff of nightmares. So, what's the deal? Located just off the coast of Brazil, approximately 93 miles from Sao Paulo, Snake Island, as its name suggests, has what you call a bit of a snake problem. So much so, in fact, the Brazilian Navy has expressly forbid anyone who's not a part of a government-approved research team from setting foot there. And at this point you might be wondering why this is. I mean, Australia is full of poisonous snakes and people seem to want to go there all the time. Well, there are a number of factors that make this place a bit different. Firstly, it's the number of snakes. Although the island itself is quite small, covering an area of about 106 acres, it's estimated to contain somewhere between 2,000 and 4,000 snakes. And these aren't just any snakes, they're uniquely dangerous snakes. Because the only real source of food is migratory birds, the golden lancehead viper, a predominantly arboreal species, has over the years evolved a particularly potent and fast-acting venom. Although this is good news for the snakes, allowing them to quickly subdue any bird that stops for a quick rest, it would not be so good for any human who happened to get bitten. As you might be able to imagine, this completely uninhabited island does not have an established medical centre. According to one expert who claims to have visited the island more than 20 times, there are no official reports of a human being bitten, but that doesn't stop the locals from telling stories to scare tourists. One such story involves the island's last lighthouse keeper and his family. Allegedly, one night, while they were all sleeping, many snakes slithered in through an open window, and although the lighthouse keeper fought valiantly to save his wife and children, they'd eventually all succumbed to the venom. Whether this story is true or not, we're inclined to agree with the Brazilian Navy on this one. Best to stay away from Snake Island.
Alright, just before we dive back into today's video, let me take a moment to thank today's fantastic sponsor, and that is Sheath Underwear, the brand that will absolutely change the way that you wear underwear. Look, if you've ever had those moments where it's like, it's so hot outside, and your boxers are a sauna, everything's sticking together, it's a bad time. I mean, for me, especially in the gym, well, in that case, Sheath is for you. It's underwear that actually keeps things organized and breathable. Sheath's boxer brief use a unique dual pouch design, so they basically keep everything where it belongs. There's no sticking, there's no shifting, just perfect comfort. You don't think about it. There's no awkward rearranging. It's just like, oh, look, everything's nicely in its right place. How great is that? And you know, you might be a little bit skeptical. I was at first, when I first started working with Sheath years ago now. I was like, guys, you're gonna have to send me this before I endorse it. And I tried it and I'm like, okay, now I fully get it. And gradually over time, my entire underwear drawer has just been replaced with Sheath stuff. Sometimes I'll just even be like, I don't know, don't even need the pockets there. You can just wear it normally. It's just like regular, just very nice quality underwear. Plus they've got bamboo and mesh options, so great for every season. And a new women's line. Plus, with Sheath's new winter designs rolling out and winter base layers back in stock, it's a great time to give them a try. Go to sheathunderwear.com, and when you use the promo code Sideprojects, you'll score 20% off your order, which is nice. Sheathunderwear.com, promo code Sideprojects. Thanks to Sheath for sponsoring, and now back to today's episode.
There are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of shipwreck sites all around the globe, many of which are impossible for you to visit simply because the location is too remote or the water is too deep. But what if we were to tell you that just north of the Isle of Sheppey, close to the mouth of the River Thames, there is a shipwreck you can see with the naked eye, but absolutely cannot visit? The tale of the Rich of Montgomery is a fascinating one, complete with design errors, cutting corners, glaring military mistakes, and government incompetence. If you're interested in going into this story in much greater detail, you can find a comprehensive video over on our Into the Shadows channel, but, well, here's a quick summary. During the Second World War, America built a large collection of cheap, easily assembled cargo vessels. These cargo vessels, known as Liberty ships, were regularly used to transport various war-related supplies from America to Europe. One such ship, the Rich of Montgomery, ran aground on a sandbank just outside of the River Thames in 1944 during a stopover on its way to France. Unfortunately, although some of the munitions bound for the front lines were retrieved due to the overall instability of both the ship and its cargo, a lot of those unexploded munitions are still there to this day. Until fairly recently, the Rich of Montgomery was somewhat of a tourist attraction. You don't have to look too hard online to find photographs of people climbing on the exposed portions of the wreck, using it as a fishing platform, or visiting it as part of an organised tourist expedition. Although the Ministry of Defence carries out regular surveys on the ship's exterior condition, without being able to get inside, it is impossible to determine whether anything is still capable of exploding, or indeed to remove any of it. As for its potential danger, opinions divided. Some people claim that after all these years, the seawater would have caused all the explosive components to degrade to such a degree that they would no longer function, while others claim that the danger is very real indeed, and if an explosion were to be triggered, it could cause genuine devastation for miles around. As for what could be done, the UK government seems intent on continually kicking the can down the road and waiting for it to become someone else's problem. There is at least one piece of good news. The cordon around the wreck is much more rigorously enforced than it used to be, and anyone attempting to breach that cordon will have some serious questions to answer. Although some people do live on North Sentinel Island, at least according to census information gathered in 2011, you can't go there. Nor can we. In fact, nobody who was not born on the island can set foot on it, and the reason is very simple indeed. You see, North Sentinel Island is home to the Sentinelese tribe, one of the very last tribes to successfully avoid the scourge of the modern world, and they have made it abundantly clear that they're quite happy about this. So, well, what do we know? According to an article on Forbes called Everything We Know About the Isolated Sentinelese People of North Sentinel Island, the island, located in India's Bay of Bengal, is home to between 80 and 150 people. These people, who live in lean-to mud huts, weave baskets and build small canoes from which they fish and harvest crabs. Interestingly, because of their almost total isolation from the outside world, their language remains a complete mystery to everybody. But just how have they managed to maintain this isolation? Well, there are a number of factors. Firstly, the island's comparative remoteness. Surrounded by a reef away from major shipping lanes and with very few valuable resources, North Sentinel just hasn't drawn that much attention over the years. Secondly, and more importantly, the people who live there are certainly not shy when it comes to expressing their wishes to be left alone, even if they don't speak a known language. Although records indicate that we may have known there were people on the island back in 1771, according to the article we mentioned earlier, nobody would land there until about 100 years later, when an Indian merchant ship called the Nineveh ran aground on the reef. 86 passengers and 20 crew managed to swim and splash their way to the beach. They huddled there for 3 days before the Sentinelese evidently decided the intruders had overstayed their welcome, a point they made with bows and iron-tipped arrows. After that, the islanders would remain undisturbed until 1880, when a young Navy officer decided it would be a good idea to have a look around. Although the islanders all abandoned their villages and hid, the group still managed to abduct 6 of the locals, 2 elderly people and 4 children, and took them away to study them. Sadly, the entire group quickly became ill, and after the 2 adults died, the Navy returned the children to the shore of North Sentinel Islands, because, why not introduce diseases for which it is incredibly unlikely that the locals have built up any immunity? That sounds like a brilliant idea. Now, even though this probably did very little to improve their view of outsiders, a group of anthropologists was able to establish contact in the early 1970s, largely by repeatedly dropping off shipments of coconuts and then running away. Although this would continue until 1994, when the Indian government made it very clear the islanders were to be left alone, the team still discovered little about the Sentinelese way of life. The last time anybody seems to have checked in on them in any capacity was after the 2004 tsunami, when a helicopter was flown over the island. According to reports, the Sentinelese appeared to have been absolutely fine, which is more than could be said for the last person who seems to have attempted to land on the island, American tourist John Allen Chow. Chow is reported to have sailed to Sentinel Island, got out of his boat and walked up to the beach singing hymns. It is believed that he was chased back into the water at least twice, then after refusing to get the message, he was killed and buried, although his body was never recovered. However, we believe the message is really quite clear. These people just want to be left alone. As the summer of 1940 drew to a close, archaeology was understandably the furthest thing from people's minds. One of the millions of people who definitely weren't thinking about archaeology was a young apprentice mechanic from Dordogne in the southwest of France named Marcel Ravaday. Nevertheless, while out for a walk one day, he made a discovery that, albeit briefly, would become worldwide news. On the hill behind his hometown of Montignac, there was a hole, the sort of hole that children everywhere want to investigate, and parents everywhere forbid their children from investigating. After venturing deeper into the hole than he ever had before, Ravaday discovered that it was in fact a tunnel. If he could somehow widen the tunnel, he might be able to access the cave network that was rumoured to exist beneath the hill. So, a couple of days later, he and 3 of his friends returned to the hole with some rudimentary digging equipment, and it wasn't long before Ravaday and his friends were falling into a cave that had not been accessed by humans for thousands of years. While the cave itself was not particularly remarkable, what the 4 boys found on the walls of the cave absolutely was. They had stumbled across one of the most extensive, well-preserved collections of Paleolithic artwork on the planet. After spending several days exploring, they informed one of their teachers of their find. After he did some investigating himself, he alerted a visiting archaeologist, and the news was quickly spread. Later that same year, the cave was given statutory historic monument protection, and after the war, people became very interested in seeing it. The trouble is, even when people who know what they're doing and give the utmost respect to such places start investigating, deterioration is inevitable. And so it was that this collection, which had been almost perfectly preserved for perhaps 20,000 years, degraded significantly over a few short decades. So, what could people do about this? Well, obviously the preservation of these ancient relics for both the enjoyment and study of future generations had to be the most important consideration. But what about those interested in seeing them now? Well, in 1963, a compromise was reached. The original cave was closed to the public, and over the years, some superb replicas were created. Of course, the actual cave is still available to those whose research necessitates access to the originals, but for the likes of us, replicas will have to do. On balance, I think we agree with this. After all, this is legitimate, high-quality art from 20,000 years ago. Creating replicas also comes with an additional bonus. As part of the process, many hugely detailed, high-resolution scans were taken of the original cave, and you can now view these as part of a virtual tour online from the comfort of your own home. If you look at a map from 200 years ago and compare it to one from today, there will be many places that appear to have changed. However, these changes are largely due to places adopting new names or having new names forced upon them, and ownership of countries being handed back to the correct people, things like that. It's very rare for a brand new landmass to emerge. However, in the case of Cery Island, 32 kilometers, 20 miles off the southern coast of Iceland, that's exactly what happens. Imagine, if you will, that you're part of a fishing crew working off the coast of Iceland. So far, your day has been pretty normal. You've caught some fish, you've frozen some fish, and you've eaten some fish. Same old, same old. Then, you notice some unusual oceanic activity. Although the weather is completely calm, some pretty big waves have sprung up. Being a seasoned ocean veteran, you're not too concerned. That, of course, is until you see a column of smoke rising in the distance. Assuming that the smoke is coming from another boat, you immediately haul in your nets and travel towards it as fast as you can in case you need to provide assistance. When you get there though, you genuinely cannot believe your eyes. The smoke, as far as you can tell, is coming from the ocean itself. Suddenly, you realise what's going on. An undersea volcano has started to erupt, and you get out of there as quickly as you can. This, apart from a little poetic license, is exactly what happened to the crew of the Islifer. Whilst this is not unheard of, what happened next is pretty unusual. According to one report, quote, "What the crew of Islifer witnessed that day was the beginning of massive volcanic eruptions." After just a couple of days, the island of Cery was over 500 meters long and 45 meters high, but the islands continued to grow as the eruption continued unabated. By April 1965, the ash had blocked the seawater around the growing cone, allowing lava flows to become more prominent without deterrence. In 1967, after the eruption stopped, Cery stood at 171 meters above sea level. End quote. Not only is this quite unusual, but it has provided scientists with a never-before-available opportunity. As soon as it became apparent what was happening, the island was swiftly designated as a Wild Heritage Site, and unless you were part of a very specific research team, you weren't allowed to go anywhere near it. Now, for possibly the first time in history, scientists can observe exactly how new plant species may arrive and develop in a completely new location. Sadly, this window of observation has a comparatively short predicted lifespan. It's believed that if erosion continues at the current rate, the whole thing could once again disappear beneath the waves by the end of the century. Until it does, though, scientists will continue to study it, and you'll continue to not be allowed to go there. Have you ever spent countless hours online looking for your favourite brand of tomato seed only to discover they're out of stock? No? Well, yeah, me neither. But if you are that sort of person, the Doomsday Vault, more formally known as the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, has your back. All you have to do is travel to the remote island of Spitsbergen, part of Norway's Svalbard archipelago, and ask the guardians of the vault if they have any. We guarantee you they will. Obviously, you can't actually do this. Setting aside the logistical impracticality of making the journey for a single packet of seeds, the ones contained within this vault are not for sale. So you might be wondering exactly why is the world's largest collection of seeds buried in a climate-controlled chamber beneath a mountain in one of the most inhospitable places on Earth? Given the somewhat apocalyptic nickname of the Doomsday Vault, many people believe that this huge repository of seeds exists as a global safety net in case of an apocalypse or something. In fact, though, it was constructed to help with a much more localized, though arguably just as important problem. According to an article in Time, quote, "Over the past 50 years, agricultural practices have changed dramatically, with technological advances allowing large-scale crop production. But while crop yields have increased, biodiversity has decreased to the point that now only about 30 crops provide 95% of human food energy needs. Only 10% of rice varieties that China used in the 1950s are still used today, for example. The US has lost over 90% of its fruit and vegetable varieties since the 1900s. The monoculture nature of agriculture leaves food supplies more susceptible to threats such as diseases and drought." The quote ends. Not only does the existence of this collection mean that should the worst happen and a particular species of, say, rice is wiped out, it will be able to be replenished, but the unmatched biodiversity contained within the vault could be very well required in the future to help create new crop strains. For example, strains that are impervious to new plant-based diseases or that fare better with hotter weather or drier conditions. With the very real danger that climate change presents to the global food supply, this comparatively small concrete bunker may very well be one of the most important places on Earth. Although there are many places you can't visit for reasons that have been made public, some locations are off-limits simply because the military says so, and that's the end of it.
Oh no, I'm sorry, you can't enter without a pass, sir. Excuse me.
However, that doesn't stop people from commenting or speculating on exactly what happens there, and the Woomera Prohibited Area, or WPA, is no exception. So, what do we know? Covering an area of 122,000 square kilometers, that's about 47,000 square miles, and located about 450 kilometers or 280 miles north of Adelaide, the Woomera Prohibited Area is described as a, quote, globally unique military testing range and a key asset in defense capability. For those of you without a doctorate in military and government jargon, it's basically one of the largest military test sites in the world. According to the area's own website, quote, following the advances in military technology of World War II, Australia and the UK formed the Anglo-Australia Joint Project in 1946. The centrepiece of the project was the establishment of a long-range weapons testing facility at Woomera. The area was declared a prohibited area in 1947, and the first military trial took place in December 1947. But there's more. The area was also deeply involved in early space exploration. The website goes on to say, from 1957, Woomera became a global focal point for space activity, including being chosen as the launch point for the European Launch Development Organization, or ELDO. At the height of its space activity, Woomera had the second highest number of rocket launches in the world after NASA's facilities at Cape Canaveral in Florida. Although understandably the area is largely off-limits to most people, there are a few exceptions. Many areas can be accessed by various Aboriginal tribes, and due to Woomera's vast deposits of natural resources, several mining permits have been issued by the government. As so often happens with any large restricted area, many rumours have grown around the place. As you might expect, many of these rumours centre around top-secret government testing labs and, of course, UFO and alien activity. Given that we're talking about an area approximately the size of England here, it would be difficult to discount any of these rumours with 100% certainty, but even those who are proponents seem half-hearted at best. It certainly hasn't developed to the almost mythical status of, say, Area 51. As far as this list goes, it's certainly not the most secure location, but you'd still struggle to visit parts of it without an exceptionally good reason.